The captain was a man forged by the sea and steel. His name was Captain Elias Thorne, and for 15 years the decks of the Alliance fleet had been his only true home. He was a giant of a man, with a broad chest and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. The crew of the Vindicator, his ship, didn't just respect him, they feared him. He was a hard man in a hard universe, where a moment's hesitation could mean explosive decompression and a cold death in the void. He ran a tight ship, and his word was the only law that mattered. The Vindicator was a patrol cruiser, a ship designed for one thing: hunting pirates. For the last 6 months, they had been chasing a phantom, a ghost ship called the Ravenous, that had been preying on supply convoys near the Cygnus sector. The raids were brutal, efficient, and left no survivors. The pressure from Fleet Command was immense. They wanted results, and they wanted them now. This pressure had turned Thorne, already a stern man, into a coiled spring of tension and barely contained rage. The night it happened, they had received a priority signal. A civilian transport, the Starlight Dream, was under attack. They had pushed the engines to the red line, but by the time they dropped out of FTL near the designated coordinates, it was over. The transport was a mangled, drifting hulk, its hull punctured in a dozen places, atmosphere bleeding out into the black like a dying breath. There were no escape pods. There were no survivors. Thorne stood on the bridge, his hands clasped tightly behind his back, staring at the wreckage on the main view screen. The silence on the bridge was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's systems. His first officer, a young woman named Lieutenant Commander Eva Rostova, approached him cautiously. "Captain, long-range scanners are picking up a single vessel, small, unmarked. It's on an escape vector, heading for the asteroid field." Thorne didn't move. His voice was a low rumble. "The Ravenous?" "Unknown, sir. She's running dark. No transponder signal." Finally, he turned, his dark eyes scanning the faces of his bridge crew. They all flinched under his gaze. "Helm, intercept course. Maximum military power. I want that ship tractored and brought into the hangar bay. Now!" The chase was short and brutal. The smaller ship was fast and nimble, but the Vindicator was a warship. A warning shot across its bow, a targeted blast from a point defense cannon that clipped its port engine, and the chase was over. The ship, a sleek, unmarked corvette, was hauled into the cavernous hangar bay like a fish on a line. Thorne was already halfway to the hangar bay before the ship had even been fully tractored in. He was a storm cloud in human form, his footsteps echoing on the metal deck plates. His executive officer, Commander Jian Li, a man whose calm demeanor was the perfect counterpoint to Thorne's fury, struggled to keep pace. "Captain, regulations state we should establish a secure perimeter and await a boarding party from Marine Command. We don't know who's on that ship." "I know exactly who's on that ship, Commander," Thorne growled, not breaking his stride. "Pirates, murderers, and I'm going to drag them out myself." The hangar bay was a flurry of activity. The damage control teams had already sprayed a temporary sealant over the wounded corvette's engine, and a squad of Marines in full combat armor had formed a semicircle around its landing struts, their pulse rifles trained on the hull. The ship's ramp was still down, a dark, inviting maw. Thorne strode past the Marines, ignoring the shouted warnings of their sergeant. "Stand down," he barked. "This is my ship." He reached the bottom of the ramp and peered into the darkness within. "All right, you cowardly sons of bitches, the party's over. Come out with your hands up or I'll blow you and this tin can into next Tuesday." There was a moment of silence. Then, a figure appeared in the gloom. It was a single person. They were wearing a standard-issue fleet survival suit, the helmet obscuring their face. They moved slowly, cautiously down the ramp. Thorne didn't wait. As soon as the figure's boot touched the hangar bay deck, he lunged forward. He grabbed the figure by the front of their suit, spun them around, and slammed them back against the cold metal hull of the corvette with a force that knocked the breath from their lungs. He pinned them there, his forearm pressed against their chest, his face inches from the reflective visor of their helmet. He could feel them struggling, a futile effort against his strength. The rage that had been building for months finally boiled over. "You think you can just slaughter innocent people and run?" he snarled, his voice a guttural whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "You think there's a hole in the universe deep enough for scum like you to hide in? This is for the crew of the Starlight Dream." His free hand balled into a fist, pulling back for a blow that would shatter the helmet and the skull beneath it. He never got to throw the punch. The figure stopped struggling. A hand, small and gloved, came up and calmly pressed a button on the side of the helmet. With a soft hiss of equalizing pressure, the helmet seal broke, and the figure lifted it from their head. Thorn's fist remained frozen in the air. His arm, rigid with fury, suddenly felt like lead. The face that emerged from the helmet was not the scarred, grizzled visage of a pirate he had expected. It was a woman. Her hair was dark, streaked with silver, and pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky, cold and clear, and they were staring directly into his with an expression of such profound, icy calm that it sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated dread straight through his core. He knew that face. He had seen it in every official fleet communication, in every strategic briefing, on the wall of every command center he had ever been in. It was the face of Admiral Elara Vance, the youngest person ever to hold the rank of Admiral in the history of the Alliance fleet. She was the mastermind behind the Cygnus campaign. She was the architect of the fleet's entire strategic doctrine. She was, quite simply, his commanding officer. For one eternal, horrifying second, time stood still. Captain Elias Thorne, the terror of the Vindicator, the man who feared nothing, found himself staring into the eyes of his own personal doom. His arm, still cocked and ready to strike, trembled. The words he had just snarled echoed in the sudden ringing silence of the hangar bay. "You think you can just slaughter innocent people and run? This is for the crew of the Starlight Dream." Admiral Vance didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply looked down at the forearm pinning her to the hull, then slowly raised her gaze back to his. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled, and utterly terrifying in its lack of emotion. "Captain Thorne, I presume. You can take your hand off me now." The sound of his own name, spoken in that calm, devastating tone, broke the spell. Thorne released her as if her suit had suddenly become red hot. He stumbled back a full pace, his face, moments ago a mask of righteous fury, now a canvas of stark horror. Behind him, he could hear the sharp intake of breath from Commander Lee and the Marines, the clatter of a rifle being lowered too quickly, the shuffle of boots as men took involuntary steps backward. Admiral Vance straightened the front of her survival suit, her movements precise and unhurried. She tucked the helmet under her arm and looked past Thorne, at the stunned crew gathered in the hangar bay, and then at the hulking form of the Vindicator around her. She took in the scratched deck plates, the hastily applied sealant on her ship, the array of armed Marines, and finally, her gaze settled back on the man who had just physically assaulted a 4-star admiral of the fleet. "An interesting welcome," she said, her tone as dry as a dead star. "Your hospitality is certainly memorable, Captain." Thorne's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The words he had screamed at her about slaughtering innocents, about the Starlight Dream, now hung in the air like a noose. He had just accused his own admiral of being a pirate. He had just threatened to beat a confession out of her. The blood drained from his face, leaving him pale and clammy. He felt the cold hand of a court-martial, of disgrace, of a firing squad, wrap itself around his throat. "Admiral," Commander Lee was the first to recover, stepping forward and snapping a textbook-perfect salute. His voice was steady, but his eyes were wide with disbelief. We received a distress call. The Starlight Dream. We had no idea." Admiral Vance acknowledged his salute with a curt nod. "At ease, Commander. Your actions were appropriate given the information you had." Her eyes flicked back to Thorne, who was still standing there, a statue of petrified guilt. "Though perhaps the execution was a tad enthusiastic. The comment was a slap in the face. Thorne finally found his voice, though it was a ragged whisper. "Admiral, I didn't know. The ship, it was unmarked, running dark. We found you at the scene of the massacre. You thought I was the perpetrator," she finished for him, her voice leaving no room for argument. A logical, if incorrect, conclusion. The Ravenous is clever. They used a targeted EMP burst to disable the Starlight Dream's communications, then jammed our long-range signal. My ship, the Sentinel, was on a covert observation mission. We were the only vessel close enough to respond, but by the time we arrived, the pirates were already gone. They damaged my engines before fleeing. I was attempting to reach the asteroid field to hide and make repairs when you so forcefully intercepted me. The explanation, perfectly logical and calm, only made Thorne feel worse. He had not only assaulted a superior officer, but he had also potentially jeopardized a covert operation and interfered with an admiral's attempt to survive. The silence in the hangar bay was suffocating. Every single member of his crew was watching this scene unfold, watching their mighty captain be reduced to a stammering wreck in front of a woman half his size. Admiral Vance seemed to sense the weight of the moment. She looked around at the gathered crew, then back at Thorne. "Captain, I believe I require a secure communication line to Fleet Command, a status report on my ship, and a very large cup of coffee. Can your ship provide these things?" It was an olive branch, a way to shift the focus from his monumental blunder to a matter of duty. Thorne grasped it like a drowning man. "Of course, Admiral, right away." He turned to Lee, his command voice returning, though it was shaky. "Commander, have engineering get a full diagnostic on the Admiral's vessel. I want a security detail stationed here. No one goes near it without my direct authorization. And clear the bay." As the crew scrambled to obey, Thorne finally met the Admiral's gaze again. "Admiral, I am profoundly sorry for my actions. I will, of course, submit myself for a full court-martial upon our return to base." Admiral Vance studied him for a long moment. He expected anger, a cutting remark, a promise of retribution. Instead, a flicker of something else crossed her face. It might have been understanding, or maybe just a deep, bone-tired weariness. "Your record, Captain Thorne, states that you are aggressive, tenacious, and fiercely protective of civilian lives. It's why you were assigned to hunt the Ravenous. Today, those qualities got the better of you. We'll discuss it later. For now, I have a report to file. And you have a pirate to catch." She began walking towards the hangar bay exit. As she passed him, she paused, her voice dropping so only he could hear. "But for the record, Captain, no one has ever pinned me against a wall before. It was a unique experience. Don't make it a habit." She walked away, leaving Captain Elias Thorne standing alone in the middle of his hangar bay, a man who had just committed the greatest professional sin of his life, and who had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. The cold knot of dread in his stomach had not gone away. It had simply transformed into something else, a deep, gnawing uncertainty. He had seen the Admiral's calm, but he had also seen the steel behind it. He had made a powerful enemy, or at the very least, he had given a powerful person every reason to destroy him. As he walked slowly back towards the bridge, he knew one thing for certain. His life as he knew it was over. The only question was, what would rise from the ashes? The walk from the hangar bay to the bridge was the longest of Elias Thorne's life. Every step was a hammer blow of self-recrimination. He replayed the scene in the hangar bay over and over. The slam of her body against the hull, the raised fist, the venomous words. He had treated a four-star admiral, a living legend, like a common criminal. The son of a dock worker, he had clawed his way up through the ranks with sheer grit and a refusal to fail. And in one moment of blind rage,